Hey everybody, so we're going to read chapters 70 through 73 in the book America History, a Visual Encyclopedia. And so you have those pages. So what I want you to do is either print them or open up your computer and read them with me while you're reading it, okay? And at the end, I am going to be asking you 3 questions that you're going to answer, okay? So here we go. The Union shattered 1850 to 1876. In your hands and not in mine is the momentous issue of Civil War. With those words of warning to the leaders of the South, President Abraham Lincoln took the oath of office in 1861. Now, I'm not very big on memorizing dates. I don't think they're super important, mainly because we have Google at our fingertips nowadays. But I do think knowing when Abraham Lincoln took office is probably an important date for you to remember. So try to remember 1861, okay? And maybe if you have a little piece of paper in front of you, actually go get one if you don't have one. Can you go get a little piece of paper? Go get a piece of paper and have a little note, okay? Because I want you to write down 1861. So Lincoln is president, 1861. I think that's a super important date. Southerners insisted that slavery be allowed in new territories in the West. Lincoln and the Republican Party, while promising not to limit slavery where it already existed, were firmly opposed to any extensions. They didn't want slavery coming in any new parts of the United States. 11 states, feeling they had been denied the right to make such decisions for themselves, refused to accept Lincoln's presidency and seceded from the Union, okay? So they did not accept that Lincoln was their president, and they said, we're out of here. In April of 1861, America plunged into the Civil War. After 4 years of grim fighting, the North's victory restored the Union. 4 million slaves were freed. A decade of rebuilding followed, a time of uncertainty and struggle known as Reconstruction. All right, so take a minute and look at that map, the timeline on the bottom. I actually think this timeline's a little hard to read, but this kind of just can show you some of the things that were going on during this period of our history. So if you want to, you can even pause my video right now and take a look at that. But there's Lincoln. He comes in 1861, and then all the things that are going to be happening, okay? And actually, I should have started on page 70 because, so actually page 70 and 71, you guys don't have a copy of the book, is one long timeline along the bottom. So if you wanted to, you could even open up page 70 and page 71 at the same time on your computer and pull them aside, right? And you could see the entire timeline. In fact, I'll try to show you, I'm not sure if this will work, what it would look like on my computer. See that, how I've got the 2 pages open? So you can actually read the whole timeline all the way across and see that picture of the Civil War that's on there. Okay, so that's pages 70 and 71. So now page 7, now this is about the United States in the 1860s. So you have to remember where we're at right now, right? We've got slavery. We're having a fight over slavery. So we have a civil war. The Union, which is the North, basically wins. And so slavery is over. Of course, slavery was not just over. It was over, but there's a lot of issues with that, okay? So it wasn't as clean as that sounds. But slavery is over. But now we have, we've just had this huge war. All right, let's look at page 72. North and South drift apart. So from the 1820s to the 1850s, industry developed at a fast pace in the North, while the South relied on farming its plantations. So you're going to hear me talk about the Industrial Revolution, and I'm going to talk about that in our other history unit that you're going to hear it. But you have to imagine, and this is really important that you understand this, because I feel like I didn't get this till I was an adult, that at this time in our history, we have little farms everywhere, all over the place. And those farms are, the mom and the dad stay home and they work together to make the farm work. So let's say the mom is making a quilt. Mom sews a quilt. She goes next door. She trades the quilt with the neighbor for milk, or she gets paid from the neighbor for the quilt and she pays somebody else for milk. But with the Industrial Revolution came factories, and the factories are now able to make these quilts way faster than that lady can make her quilt. And so nobody wants to buy her quilts anymore. So it ends up that her husband has to go into work. And now we've got fathers leaving the home for the first time and mothers trying to run the home and all the stress that's involved in that. The North was doing that much quicker. The South, where slavery was still going on, was still doing just a lot of farming, okay, a lot of plantations. Cash crops had long been profitable there due to the use of slave labor. So because they had the slaves that were doing the work for free, they could make a lot of money on their crops. If they would have had to pay people to help them, they probably could not have afforded to do it. So the slaves made a lot of those things free. Many Northerners opposed that. Southerners depended on the North for manufactured goods. So the South, it depends on the North for a lot of these goods that they're sending down. And the Northern factories depended on the raw goods, right? The cotton and all that was produced in the South. So they actually still needed each other. As the territories west of the Mississippi River joined the nation, as new states, okay? So now we've got the Mississippi, we've got the United States, right? States on this side of the Mississippi River are joining the United States. So open up, I've got this attached there, picture of the U.S. map so you can see this. So I want you to be able to see this on your map, okay? And take a look as I'm talking about these things so you can see the United States. So the territories west of the Mississippi River joined the nation as new states. The issue of whether to allow slavery erupted nationally. Both North and South were fighting for control. So now we've got these new states west of the Mississippi that want to be in, and the North is saying no slavery, and the South is saying yes, slavery. By the 1860s, this is under the industrial North. Oh, also, it defines cash crops there for you. They're grown for sale at market rather than personal use. So they're crops, they're not like our garden, right? So by 1860s, the North's 75,000 mills and factories produced 85% of the country's goods. Farm tools, furniture, clothing, quilts, like I mentioned, all the things. Of the 30,000 miles of railroad track connecting cities and factory towns east of the Mississippi, 2/3 of that mileage was in the North. Okay, so east of the Mississippi River, take a look. You guys see the Mississippi River there on your map? East of the Mississippi River, almost all of those railroads are actually working in the North and moving stuff around in the North. Controlling the means of shipping allowed northern industries to sell manufactured goods to the newly settled West. In return, Midwestern farms shipped grain, meat, and raw materials needed for industry to the East. On the bottom, there's a picture of Tom Thumb, which was a steam-powered locomotive built by Peter Cooper. It was raced against a horse-drawn railroad car in 1830. The horse won, but the event heralded a new age for railroads. So remember, prior to railroads, right, we can't really move stuff around. You guys got to imagine. You couldn't just, it would take weeks to maybe travel from, even like from Kentucky to Tennessee. You're on a horse-drawn carriage without roads. Have you guys ever tried to ride anything on a road that doesn't exist, like just through it's hard. It's really hard. So Peter Cooper up there, it says, was an inventor, industrialist, and philanthropist. Philanthropist is somebody who gives away their money. They basically just help good causes, who believe that the wealthy have a duty to help society. Before the age of 30, Cooper made his fortune with a glue factory. About 1828, he built an iron works in Baltimore, iron factory, and began a second career in the iron industry. During his life, Cooper produced many inventions, including a steam-powered locomotive and flavored gelatin. It's like Jell-O. And he supported the development of the new telegraph network. Telegraphs were how we got back and forth. You didn't have phones yet, but we could send telegrams, which were tiny little messages through code. He also helped to secure public education, and he improved sanitation in New York City. Because remember, in the olden days, sometimes they would just go to the bathroom and just pour it out somewhere. Okay, so we got a lot of people. In 1859, he founded the Cooper Union, which was a university that gives all of its students a free education. So the North's industry started with a handful of cotton mills on the banks of rivers. Francis Cabot Lowell's mill on the Merrimack River in Massachusetts grew into the mile of mills on the Merrimack, where cotton and wool were spun into thread to make cloth. Other mills turned out everything from boots and bottles to watches and wrenches. Then America steamed into the railroad age, adding swift transportation to the Industrial Revolution. So now we don't just have factories, right? Now we've got transportation that can move the stuff around. Okay, so open up page 73 now. So you got to go to the next page in your handout. If you wanted to print these, I am totally supportive of that. But if for any reason you can't, you can read them right on your screen. So changes for Northern workers. Some of the first mill owners felt a sense of fatherly responsibility for their workers, many of whom were young women who left their farming families to earn wages. In Lowell, Massachusetts, the Lowell girls lived in clean boarding houses. They continued their schooling. They published their own literary magazine. So these girls that would work there would have like a really nice place to live. And they had left their farming families and they'd come here. So these people took good care of them, or hopefully took good care of them. These working conditions changed after 1840. Company owners wanted to increase production, so they hired managers to run their growing businesses, and the managers cut wages. Due to political turmoil in Germany and a potato famine in Ireland, immigrants came to America in large numbers. The newcomers were willing to work for less than others, which kept wages low. Workers who tried to strike or to organize into groups called unions to negotiate pay and working conditions were simply fired. So there's a picture there of the Merrimack River, and it provided jobs for women wanting a life off of the farm. So now let's read about the plantations in the South. And we've got a real photo there of the cotton plantations in the South. I don't know if you guys have ever seen cotton fields. If you ever get an opportunity to see them, it's incredible. And to think about picking that by hand in the worst heat you can imagine, and not getting paid for it and just having to do it is really hard to imagine. Large plantations had dominated the economic, political, and social life of the South for more than a century. Most Southern farmers, about 70%, owned no slaves, but they supported and looked up to the region's planting class, categorized as those who owned at least 20 slaves. These wealthiest gentleman farmers were the leaders of the Southern society. So before the invention of the cotton gin, okay, and I'm going to actually post a video for you about the cotton gin. It was hard to produce the large amount of cotton needed to make a profit. Once the gin was in use, though, it was easier to do. Cotton production grew quickly as new land was planted along the Gulf of Mexico. Plantations then bought more and more slaves to plant and harvest the cotton. By 1820, 2/3 of America's exports consisted of bales of cotton. Southerners boasted cotton is king. So then you have a picture there, bales of cotton on the dock at Union Wharf in Charleston, South Carolina, wait to be loaded onto ships. By the end of the 1700s, and of course, Lincoln is not, Lincoln's not president yet, remember, because you wrote down the year that he became president. Laws had freed the slave in most northern states. After that, about 250,000 free blacks lived in the North, and another 250,000, mostly enslaved, lived in the South. Southern slaves became free by escaping to the North, buying their own freedom, or being freed by their masters. Some African Americans descended from indentured servants or freed slaves were free since birth. So some African Americans descended from indentured servants or from freed slaves who were free since birth. Free blacks flocked to northern cities, finding employment in factories and the shipping industry. Northern blacks usually lived in segregated communities, apart from whites, and they formed their own churches, schools, and businesses. Racial discrimination was widespread in the North, creating separate places to live together, gave blacks protection and support. The vast majority of free blacks were poor, but some had skilled professions and earned enough to purchase homes and land. Okay, so now I am going to ask you a few questions, okay? And these questions are going to be typed on a little document on the bottom, and I want you to open them up, and I want you to answer the questions. And I'm actually going to change my mind. I'm not going to do that. I am going to do this instead. I'm going to go over the questions with you, and I'm going to ask you one question that I'd like you to submit for an answer. Okay? So the first question I'm going to ask you is, why did the North and South drift apart? Why do you think they drifted apart? So think about that. See if you can think about it. Okay, the North was gaining their money how? They were gaining their money through industry, right? Factories. And the South was gaining their money through farming and crops. What caused working conditions in mills to begin changing? Remember how they had the dormitory? There's a picture of that there on page 73 where the women would stay. And what changed that? Well, they got new bosses, right? And those new bosses and managers started cutting wages, which then made it not as good. Or they would hire immigrants who would work for less than they would be able to work for. So there's also a place there on page 73, the box there that says false freedom. So on page 73, the book calls freedom in the North false freedom. Was the freedom false, or was the issue discrimination? So I'd like you to think about that question. And I'm going to talk about it a little bit more, and that's what I want you to answer. This is a little tricky. So were the slaves actually free, or were they facing discrimination? Were they still facing discrimination? So in other words, they had to live in their own neighborhoods and their own places. Why did they have to do that? Were they free? And that's the question I want you to answer for me. And there isn't exactly a right answer to this, and I'm going to respond back to you, and we're going to talk about it a little bit. But I want you to put your answer in the group comments for this, okay? In the class comments, so that you can respond to each other with this. And I want you to put your answers there, and you can kind of talk back and forth. Do we think that the blacks in the North were free? Okay? And what do we think about that? And we're going to kind of talk about that and see what we think about this. I also really encourage you. I am going to make mistakes while I read and do history teaching. I'm actually not a history teacher, although I like it. I'm an English teacher. So I want you to be sure to discuss things that are concerning to you or you don't understand them with your parents. They may also have a different opinion on some things, and that's okay. While history is factual, some of the perceptions may be viewed differently from different people. So don't be afraid to have discussions. You know, in our society today, we're sort of taught that, like, if you disagree or you don't see it eye to eye, that something's wrong with you. And that's not true. So have good discussions with your parents. Talk to them about what you're reading. Okay? All right. So I'm going to post this for you guys. And there's going to be some other stuff on this assignment as well.